The Arizona sun burned hot overhead as dust swirled through the streets of Silver Ridge, a small frontier town that sat on the edge of Apache territory. It was the summer of 1883, and tension hung in the air like the heat that shimmered off the wooden buildings lining Main Street. Men gathered in clusters outside the saloon, their voices low and angry, their hands resting on their gun belts as they discussed the raids that had plagued their settlement for months. Thomas McKenna rode his horse slowly down the main road, his weathered face showing no expression as he observed the unusual activity in the normally quiet town. He was a rancher who lived 15 miles outside Silver Ridge, a man known for keeping to himself and running an honest operation on land he had worked for 20 years. McKenna had come to town for supplies, but something in the air told him this was not an ordinary day. Near the center of town, a crowd had formed in front of the general store. McKenna could hear shouting and the angry voices of men who had worked themselves into a fury. He guided his horse closer, his eyes narrowing as he tried to understand what was happening. Through the mass of bodies, he caught sight of something that made his blood run cold. A young woman stood in the center of the crowd, her hands bound behind her back with rough rope that had already cut into her wrists. She was Apache. That much was clear from her dark hair and the traditional clothing she wore. Her face showed no fear, only a quiet dignity that seemed to enrage the mob even more. Two men held her arms while another prepared a rope, throwing it over the thick branch of an old oak tree that stood in the town square. "She's one of them," a voice shouted from the crowd. "She was spotted near the Henderson Ranch the night it was burned." "My cattle were stolen last week," another man yelled. "These Apache savages have been bleeding us dry. It's time we sent them a message." McKenna dismounted and pushed his way through the crowd, his tall frame and broad shoulders making it easier to move between the angry settlers. He had seen mob justice before, and it never ended well. The woman's eyes met his for a brief moment, and he saw something there that troubled him deeply, not fear or guilt, but a profound sadness mixed with resignation. "What's going on here?" McKenna asked, his voice cutting through the noise. A heavy-set man with a sheriff's badge turned to face him. His name was Earl Patterson, and McKenna knew him to be a weak man who bent easily to the will of the town's more influential citizens. "Stay out of this, McKenna. This doesn't concern you." "I'm making it my concern," McKenna replied, his voice steady. "What has this woman done?" "She's Apache," someone shouted from the crowd, as if that alone was crime enough. "That's not a crime," McKenna said, turning to face the mob. "Last I checked, we still had laws in this territory. Where's the trial? Where's the evidence?" A tall man in expensive clothes stepped forward. His name was Richard Thornton, and he owned the largest ranch in the valley. "The evidence is all around us." McKenna burned homesteads, stolen livestock, murdered settlers. This woman was seen near Henderson's place the night of the fire. "Seen by who?" McKenna demanded. "By me," a thin man with a scraggly beard pushed forward. "I saw her clear as day." McKenna studied the man's face, recognizing him as Walt Kramer, a known drunk who would say anything for a few coins. "And what were you doing out there, Walt?" "The Henderson place is 20 miles from your claim." Kramer's eyes shifted nervously. I was ... I was checking my traps." In the middle of the night, McKenna's tone made it clear he didn't believe a word. Thornton stepped closer, his face hardening. "Your sympathy for the Apache is well known, McKenna, but it's going to get you in trouble one of these days. This woman is guilty, and we're going to make an example of her." McKenna's hand moved slowly to rest on the handle of his revolver. It wasn't a threat, not yet, but everyone in the crowd understood the gesture. "The law says she gets a trial if you hang her without one. You're no better than the murderers you claim to be fighting against." The crowd murmured, some agreeing, others growing more hostile. Sheriff Patterson looked nervously between McKenna and Thornton, clearly unsure which side to take. "We don't need outsiders telling us how to handle our business," Thornton said, his voice rising. "This woman is Apache. Her people have killed our friends and family, burned our homes. She's probably a scout for the war parties." "Then prove it," McKenna said. "Take her to the territorial marshal. Present your evidence. If she's guilty, she'll hang legally. But this mob justice is the kind of thing that brings federal troops down on all of us." The mention of federal intervention made several men in the crowd shift uncomfortably. They all remembered what had happened in other territories where vigilante justice had gone too far. McKenna took advantage of their hesitation. "Sheriff Patterson, you know I'm right. If you let this happen, you'll have territorial authorities investigating every one of us. They'll use this as an excuse to take our land. Impose more restrictions. Is that what you want?" Patterson's face was sweating now, torn between the will of the mob and the legal ramifications McKenna was describing. I suppose we could hold her until the circuit judge comes through." "The circuit judge won't be here for 2 months, Thornton protested. "Are we supposed to feed and house this Apache for that long?" "I'll take responsibility for her," McKenna heard himself say. Surprising even himself, "I'll keep her on my ranch. Make sure she doesn't run when the judge arrives. I'll bring her in for trial." The crowd erupted in angry shouts. "You take an Apache killer into your home," someone yelled. "I'd uphold the law," McKenna replied firmly. "Something the rest of you seem to have forgotten." Thornton's face twisted with rage. "You're making a mistake, McKenna, a big one. When she cuts your throat in the night, don't come crying to us." "I won't," McKenna said, meeting Thornton's glare without flinching. "Sheriff, do we have an agreement?" Patterson looked around at the crowd. Seeing that McKenna's words about federal intervention had done their work. The bloodlust was fading, replaced by calculation and fear of consequences. "All right," he said finally, "but you signed papers taking full responsibility. If she runs or causes any trouble—" "It's on your head," agreed, McKenna said. As the crowd slowly dispersed, grumbling and shooting dark looks at both McKenna and the Apache woman, Thornton leaned close and spoke in a voice only McKenna could hear. "You've made an enemy today. Rancher, you'll regret this." McKenna didn't respond. He simply took the rope that bound the woman's hands and led her toward his horse. Her eyes met his again. And this time he saw something different in them, a flicker of hope mixed with deep suspicion. She had no reason to trust any white man, especially one who had just taken custody of her. As McKenna helped her onto his horse and prepared to leave Silver Ridge, he wondered what he had just gotten himself into. He had saved her life, but at what cost? The town would turn against him, his business would suffer. And he still didn't know if she was innocent or guilty of the crimes they accused her of. But as they rode out of town together, the woman sitting silently behind him, McKenna knew one thing for certain: he had done the right thing. Whether it would be enough to save either of them remained to be seen. The ride back to McKenna's ranch was long and silent, stretching across 15 miles of hard desert terrain that seemed to grow hotter with each passing hour. The woman sat behind him on the horse, her bound hands making it difficult for her to hold on. But she never complained or asked to stop. McKenna could feel her tension, the way her body remained rigid and alert, ready to react if he made any threatening move when they finally reached the ranch. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. McKenna's property was modest but well-maintained. A simple wooden house with a barn, a few corrals for horses, and a small bunkhouse that had been empty since his last hired hand left 3 months ago. The land stretched out in all directions, bordered by low hills and scattered mesquite trees. McKenna dismounted and helped the woman down from the horse. She stood before him, her dark eyes watching his every movement. Still silent, still guarded, he pulled out his knife and she tensed. But he simply cut the ropes binding her wrists. The skin beneath was raw and bleeding from the tight bonds. "What's your name?" McKenna asked. His voice gentler than it had been in town. She didn't answer immediately, studying him with those penetrating eyes. Finally, she spoke. "Nayland McKenna," repeated, nodding. "My name is Thomas McKenna. You can call me Tom. I need you to understand something. I don't know if you're guilty of what they accused you of, but I wasn't going to let them hang you without a trial. That's not how justice works." "Justice," Nayland said, and there was bitter irony in her voice. "Your people do not know this word." McKenna couldn't argue with that. He had seen enough in his years on the frontier to know she had a point. "Maybe not, but I'm trying to do the right thing here. You'll stay in the bunkhouse. I'll bring you food and water. When the judge comes, you'll get your trial. And then they will hang me anyway," Nayland said flatly. "Not if you're innocent," McKenna replied. "Innocent?" Nayland laughed. "A short, harsh sound. I am Apache. That is my crime. That is all they need." McKenna led her to the bunkhouse, a simple structure with 2 narrow beds, a small table, and a window that looked out over the eastern pasture. It wasn't much, but it was clean and dry. He fetched water from the well and brought her a tin cup, watching as she drank deeply, her throat working with the desperation of someone who had been denied water for too long. "I'll bring you food soon," he said, turning to leave. "Why did you help me?" Nayland asked suddenly. Stopping him at the door, McKenna turned back, considering his answer, "Because it was the right thing to do." "That is not enough reason. Not in this place." "Not with your people," Nayland pressed. "You have made enemies today. I saw it in their faces. That man, the rich one, he will not forget." She was right about Thornton. McKenna knew that. "Let me worry about that," he said, and left the bunkhouse, securing the door from the outside with a heavy bolt that evening. As McKenna prepared a simple meal of beans and bread, he heard the sound of horses approaching. He set down the pan and walked out onto the porch, his hand instinctively checking the revolver at his hip. 3 riders emerged from the gathering dusk, and McKenna recognized them immediately. Thornton sat in the center on his expensive black stallion, flanked by 2 of his ranch hands. Rough men who were known more for their willingness to use violence than their skill with cattle. "Evening, McKenna," Thornton called out. "Not dismounting, Thornton," McKenna replied neutrally. "What brings you out here?" "Just wanted to check on our new neighbor," Thornton said with a cold smile. "Make sure that Apache woman hasn't caused you any trouble." "No trouble," McKenna said. Thornton's eyes drifted toward the bunkhouse. "You know, some of the boys in town are pretty upset about what happened today. They lost friends and family to Apache raids, seeing one of them protected by a white rancher. Well, it doesn't sit right. The law is the law," McKenna said firmly. "The law?" Thornton repeated, shaking his head. "Out here, McKenna. The law is what we make it. You should know that by now. You've been on this land long enough. Long enough to know that vigilante justice leads to more problems than it solves." McKenna replied. Thornton leaned forward in his saddle, his voice dropping to a more menacing tone. "Let me be clear with you, rancher. That woman has information about Apache movements. Raids being planned, warriors hiding in the hills. If you turn her over to me, I'll make sure she talks. And I'll make sure you're compensated for your trouble." "She's in the custody of the law now," McKenna said. "She'll be held until the circuit judge arrives." 2 months is a long time," Thornton said. "A lot can happen. Accidents, misunderstandings. Why? I've heard of ranchers losing entire herds to mysterious circumstances. Buildings catching fire in the night. It would be a shame if something like that happened to you." McKenna's jaw tightened. "Is that a threat, Thornton?" "Just a friendly warning," Thornton replied, straightening in his saddle. "This territory is dangerous. You never know what might happen to a man who doesn't have friends watching his back. I'll take my chances, McKenna said, his hands still resting on his revolver. Thornton stared at him for a long moment, then smiled again, that cold, calculating smile that never reached his eyes. Your funeral, McKenna? Boys, let's go. We've got a long ride back, as the three riders disappeared into the darkness. McKenna remained on the porch, his muscles tense and ready. He knew Thornton wasn't the type to make idle threats. The man was powerful, connected to other wealthy ranchers and businessmen throughout the territory. He could make McKenna's life very difficult if he chose to. McKenna walked to the bunkhouse and checked the bolt, making sure it was secure through the small window. He could see Nayland sitting on one of the beds, eating the food he had brought earlier. She looked up and met his eyes through the glass, and he saw understanding there. She had heard the conversation, or at least understood its meaning, later that night, as McKenna lay in his own bed in the main house. He stared at the ceiling and wondered what he had gotten himself into. He had saved a woman's life, yes, but at what cost? Thornton would not let this go. The other ranchers would follow his lead, and McKenna could find himself isolated. His business ruined, his life potentially in danger. But even as these thoughts troubled him, McKenna knew he would make the same choice again. He had seen too much injustice in his years on the frontier. Too many innocent people caught up in the hatred and violence that seemed to define relations between settlers and the Apache. If standing up for what was right meant standing alone, then so be it. Outside, a coyote howled in the distance, and the wind whispered through the mesquite trees. The desert night was peaceful, but McKenna knew it was the calm before a storm. Thornton would make his move soon, and when he did, McKenna would have to be ready. In the bunkhouse, Nayland lay awake on her narrow bed, listening to the same sounds of the night. She had heard everything Thornton said, understood the danger the rancher had put himself in by protecting her. It confused her. Why would this white man risk so much for an Apache woman he didn't know? What did he hope to gain? She had learned long ago not to trust easily, especially not the settlers who had taken her people's land and driven them into the mountains. But something about this man, this McKenna, was different. He had stood up to the mob when he could have easily walked away. He had taken responsibility for her when no one else would. Nayland closed her eyes, but sleep did not come easily. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers. She would have to remain vigilant, ready for whatever came next, but for the first time since the mob had grabbed her in the desert 3 days ago. She felt a small spark of hope. Perhaps she would live to see another sunrise after all. The first week passed slowly on the McKenna ranch, marked by a tension that seemed to hang in the air like the heat that rose from the desert floor. McKenna kept to his routine, tending his cattle and horses, repairing fences, and maintaining the property. But he was always aware of Nayland's presence in the bunkhouse, always conscious of the responsibility he had taken on. Each morning he brought her food and water, and each morning she accepted it with minimal conversation. She remained guarded, watching him with those dark, intelligent eyes that seemed to see more than he was comfortable revealing. McKenna understood her caution. She had every reason not to trust him or any white settler. On the 8th day, McKenna rode into Silver Ridge for supplies. The change in the town's attitude toward him was immediate and unmistakable. As he tied his horse to the hitching post outside the general store, several men who had always greeted him cordially now turned away without acknowledgement. Women pulled their children closer as he passed, whispering behind their hands. Inside the store, the owner, a portly man named Jacob Miller, who had always been friendly, barely looked at him as he gathered the items McKenna requested. "That'll be $18, Miller said curtly, a price McKenna knew was at least $3 higher than usual. "That seems high, Jacob," McKenna said carefully. "Prices have gone up, Miller replied without meeting his eyes. If you don't like it, you can shop elsewhere. McKenna paid without further argument, understanding that this was just the beginning. As he loaded his supplies onto his horse, Sheriff Patterson approached. His expression uncomfortable. "McKenna." "I need to talk to you," the sheriff said in a low voice. "What about?" McKenna asked. "There's been talk," Patterson said. Glancing around nervously, some of the ranchers. "They're saying you're hiding Apache raiders on your property. They want to organize a search party. The only Apache on my property is Nayland, and she's in legal custody awaiting trial." "You know that?" McKenna said, his voice hardening. I know, Patterson said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "But Thornton is stirring people up. He's been talking about how you're sympathetic to the Apache cause, how you can't be trusted. He's even suggesting that you might be passing information to the war parties about ranch defenses and cattle movements." McKenna felt anger rising in his chest. "That's a serious accusation, Sheriff, and it's completely false." "I'm not saying I believe it," Patterson said quickly, "but others do. You need to be careful, McKenna. There are men in this territory who won't hesitate to take matters into their own hands." "Is that a warning or a threat?" McKenna demanded. "It's a warning. From someone who doesn't want to see this get out of hand," Patterson replied. "Just watch yourself." McKenna rode back to his ranch in a dark mood. The isolation he had anticipated was becoming reality faster than he had expected. Thornton was working systematically to turn the entire community against him, using fear and prejudice as his tools. It was a strategy that had worked many times before in frontier towns where suspicion ran deep and trust was a rare commodity. When he arrived home, he found Nayland sitting outside the bunkhouse. Her face turned toward the sun. He had started leaving the door unbolted during the day, trusting that she wouldn't run. She could have escaped a dozen times already if that had been her intention, but she remained. Perhaps understanding that the desert offered little safety for an Apache woman alone. "You look troubled," she said as he approached. It was the first time she had initiated a conversation. McKenna dismounted and began unloading supplies. "The town has turned against me," he said. "They think I'm a traitor for protecting you." "I told you this would happen," Nayland replied without satisfaction. "Simply stating a fact, you did," McKenna acknowledged. "Tell me something, Nayland. Were you involved in any of the raids they accused you of?" She looked at him directly, her expression serious. "No, I was not a raider. I am not a warrior. I am a healer. I know the medicines of my people, the plants that cure sickness and ease pain. That is what I was doing when your people found me, gathering herbs in the desert." "Then why were you near the Henderson Ranch?" McKenna asked. Nayland's face darkened with memory. "I was not near any ranch. I was in the desert, far from settlements. The man who said he saw me, the drunk one, he lied." "Someone paid him to lie, Thornton," McKenna said. Understanding beginning to dawn. "Perhaps," Nayland said, "or someone like him. There are many who want my people gone. Who want our lands, they will use any excuse, any lie. To justify what they do." McKenna sat down on the step of the bunkhouse, his mind working through the implications. "Tell me about yourself, Nayland. How did you come to be alone in the desert?" She was quiet for a long moment, and McKenna thought she might not answer. Then she began to speak. Her voice soft but steady. 2 years ago. Soldiers came to our village. They said, "We must leave. Go to the reservation at San Carlos." My family, we did not want to go. We had heard stories of that place, of hunger and disease, of people dying. She paused, her eyes distant with memory. My father tried to reason with the soldier chief. He spoke of the old treaties, of the promises made, but they did not listen. There was a fight. My father was killed. My mother and younger brother were taken to San Carlos. I escaped into the mountains. "You've been alone for 2 years?" McKenna asked. Struck by the strength that must have required. Not always alone, Nayland said. Sometimes I found other Apache who had escaped. We would help each other, share food, but it was dangerous. The soldiers hunt us, the ranchers hunt us. Even other tribes sometimes turn us in for the reward money. So I learned to move carefully, to hide well, to survive. McKenna felt something shift inside him. This woman was not a raider or a killer. She was a survivor. Someone who had lost everything and still fought to live with dignity. "I believe you," he said quietly. Nayland looked at him with surprise. "Why?" "Because I've looked into enough lying eyes to know the difference," McKenna replied. "And because your story makes more sense than the accusations against you." That evening, as McKenna prepared their meal, he noticed movement on the distant ridge that bordered his property. Riders, at least 5 of them. Watching the ranch, they made no move to approach. Simply sat their horses on the skyline. A silent message of intimidation. Nayland had seen them too. "They will come eventually," she said. "Men like that always do. Let them come," McKenna said. Checking his rifle, "This is my land, and I have the law on my side." "The law," Nayland said with that same bitter tone she had used before. "Out here, the law is what men with guns say it is." McKenna couldn't argue with that assessment. He had seen it too many times. The way justice bent to the will of those with power and influence. But he also knew that sometimes one person standing firm could make a difference. As darkness fell and the riders finally disappeared from the ridge, McKenna made a decision. He would not simply wait for the circuit judge to arrive. He would find proof of Nayland's innocence. Evidence that would force even Thornton and his allies to acknowledge the truth. It was a long shot. But it was better than sitting idle while his life and Nayland's future hung in the balance. McKenna woke before dawn the next morning, his mind already working on the problem that had kept him awake most of the night. If Nayland was innocent, then someone had deliberately framed her. And the most likely candidate was Thornton. But why would a wealthy rancher go to such trouble to accuse a single Apache woman of crimes she didn't commit? There had to be more to the story. After bringing Nylene her breakfast, McKenna saddled his horse and rode out to examine the Henderson ranch, the place where Nayland had supposedly been seen the night of the fire. The burned ruins still stood, blackened timbers jutting up from the ground like broken teeth. McKenna dismounted and walked through the debris, looking for anything that might tell him what really happened here. The Henderson family had packed up and left for California after the fire. Their dreams of frontier life destroyed in a single night. McKenna remembered Henderson as a quiet man, a farmer more than a rancher, who had struggled to make his small claim profitable. It seemed odd that Apache raiders would target such a modest homestead when there were larger, wealthier ranches in the area. As McKenna searched through the ruins, something caught his eye. A piece of metal half buried in the ash. He pulled it free and examined it closely. It was a belt buckle, expensive and ornate, with the initials RT engraved on its surface, Richard Thornton. McKenna's jaw tightened as understanding began to dawn. He continued searching and found more evidence that troubled him. Boot prints in the hardened mud near what had been the barn. Prints from expensive riding boots, not the moccasins Apache warriors would wear. And there, near the edge of the property, he found something even more damning, a survey stake driven into the ground. Marking the land for some future purpose, McKenna rode back to his ranch, his mind racing with the implications of what he had discovered when he arrived. He found Nayland working in the small garden plot behind the bunkhouse. She had begun cultivating it without asking, planting seeds she had gathered from the desert, medicinal herbs and wild plants that she knew how to use. "I found something at the Henderson place," McKenna said, showing her the belt buckle. Nayland examined it carefully, her expression thoughtful. "This belongs to the rich man, the one who wants me dead." "It does," McKenna confirmed, and I found survey stakes on Henderson's land. Someone is planning to claim that property. I'm guessing it's Thornton or one of his associates." Nayland's eyes widened with understanding. "The land. It is always about the land." "Tell me what you know," McKenna said. Sitting down on a nearby fence post, Nayland was quiet for a moment, then began to speak. "Before I was captured, I heard things, saw things. There are men, white men, who want the Apache gone, not just because they fear us, but because they want our land, the good water sources. The valleys where grass grows, even the reservation lands, are not safe. These men make deals with corrupt officials in the territorial government. They create incidents, blame the Apache, and use the fear to justify taking more land." "And Henderson's land?" McKenna asked. "I do not know this man's land specifically," Nayland admitted, "but I have seen this pattern before. A small rancher or farmer refuses to sell his land to the powerful men. Suddenly, there is trouble. A fire, stolen cattle, sometimes even death. The Apache are blamed, and the scared family leaves. Then the land is claimed by the powerful men for almost nothing." McKenna felt anger building in his chest. "How many times have you seen this happen?" "Many times," Nayland said quietly. "There is a pattern to it. In the past year, at least 6 families have left their lands after being attacked. Each time, the Apache were blamed. But some of these attacks happened when I knew the Apache warriors were far away, hunting in the mountains or defending their own people from soldier patrols." "You're saying Thornton and men like him have been staging false raids to steal land," McKenna said, the full scope of the conspiracy becoming clear. "Yes," Nayland confirmed. "And now they try to hang me because I was in the wrong place. Or perhaps because I know too much. I have seen things while traveling in the desert. Men meeting in secret, wagons moving at night. Things that did not make sense at the time." McKenna stood and began pacing, his mind working through the implications. "If this is true, if we can prove it, Thornton and his associates will hang, not you. But we need more than a belt buckle and some survey stakes. We need documents, witnesses, solid proof." "Where would such proof be?" Nayland asked. "In Thornton's ranch office, probably," McKenna said. "Or with a territorial land office in Tucson. But getting to either place would be dangerous." That afternoon, McKenna received an unexpected visitor. A young Mexican man rode up to the ranch. Looking nervous and glancing over his shoulder repeatedly, his name was Miguel Cortez, and he worked as a hand on one of the smaller ranches near Silver Ridge. "Senator McKenna," Miguel said, dismounting quickly, "I need to speak with you. It is important." "What about?" McKenna asked. Miguel glanced at Nayland, who stood watching from the bunkhouse door. "It is about her, about what they say she did." "Go on," McKenna encouraged. "I worked for Senator Henderson before the fire," Miguel said, his words coming quickly now. "I was there that night. I saw what happened. It was not Apache who burned the ranch. It was white men, 3 of them. They wore masks. But I recognized one by his horse, a black stallion with white stockings. It belongs to Senator Thornton." McKenna felt his pulse quicken. "Why didn't you tell this to the sheriff?" Miguel's face showed fear. "Because Thornton has power. He has men who will hurt anyone who speaks against him. I have a family, Senator McKenna, a wife and 2 children. If I speak, they will suffer." "Then why are you telling me now?" McKenna asked. "Because they want to hang an innocent woman," Miguel said, his voice breaking. "I cannot let that happen. My conscience will not allow it. But if I testify, I will need protection for me and my family." McKenna put a hand on the young man's shoulder. "If you testify, I'll do everything in my power to keep you and your family safe. But I need you to be certain about what you saw." "I am certain," Miguel said firmly. "I saw them burn the barn. Heard them laugh about how everyone would blame the Apache. One of them even said they would be able to buy the Henderson land for half its value once the family ran away. McKenna looked at Nayland, who had moved closer to hear the conversation. Her expression showed cautious hope mixed with deep skepticism. She had been disappointed too many times to fully believe that justice might finally be within reach. There's more. Miguel continued. Thornton has been meeting with other ranchers, forming what he calls a protective association. They say it is to defend against Apache raids. But I have heard talk that it is really about controlling land and water rights. They plan to push out the small ranchers and farmers, take their land, and divide it among themselves. How many ranchers are involved? McKenna asked. At least 8, maybe more. Miguel replied, the richest men in the territory. They have connections in the capital, maybe even in Washington. This is bigger than just one burned ranch, Senor McKenna. This is about controlling the whole territory. McKenna felt the weight of what he was up against settle on his shoulders. This wasn't just about saving Nayland anymore. It was about exposing a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of territorial power. It was dangerous, perhaps even deadly, but it was also the right thing to do. Will you put your testimony in writing? McKenna asked Miguel. The young man hesitated, then nodded. Yes, I will do this, but please, Senor, protect my family. I give you my word, McKenna said, and he meant it. As Miguel rode away with a written statement safely tucked in his pocket, McKenna turned to Nayland. We have a witness now, and evidence. It's not enough yet. But it's a start. Nayland looked at him with those dark, penetrating eyes. You are risking everything for me. For justice. I do not understand why. Because it's right. McKenna said simply. And because if we don't stand up to men like Thornton, they'll keep getting away with it. More people will suffer. More lives will be destroyed for the first time since he had rescued her. Nayland smiled. It was a small smile. Cautious and uncertain, but it was there. Then we fight. She said, then we fight. McKenna agreed. McKenna knew that Miguel's testimony alone would not be enough to bring down Thornton and his conspiracy. They needed more witnesses, more evidence, and, most importantly, they needed someone with legal authority who would listen. The territorial marshal in Tucson was their best hope. But getting there safely would be a challenge 3 days after Miguel's visit. McKenna made the difficult decision to leave his ranch and ride to Tucson. He couldn't take Nayland with him. The journey would be too dangerous and would draw too much attention. Instead, he asked Miguel to stay at the ranch with his rifle. Protecting Nayland while McKenna was gone, you are trusting me with much. Nayland said as McKenna prepared to leave, I am. McKenna acknowledged, but I don't see another way. I need to get to the marshal, convince him to investigate Thornton and the others. It's our only chance at real justice. Nayland nodded slowly. Be careful. These men will not let you expose them without a fight. I know, McKenna said, checking his revolver one last time. The ride to Tucson took 2 days, and McKenna spent most of it watching his back trail for signs of pursuit. He knew Thornton probably had men watching the ranch, and his sudden departure would raise suspicions. But he made it to the territorial capital without incident. Arriving dusty and tired on a hot afternoon, Marshal James Garrett was a hard man in his 50s. With gray hair and eyes that had seen too much frontier violence to be easily fooled. He listened to McKenna's story with increasing interest. Examining the belt buckle and reading Miguel's written statement, this is serious. Garrett said when McKenna finished, if what you're saying is true, Thornton and his associates have been conducting a systematic campaign of fraud and violence to steal land. That's a federal crime. It's true. McKenna insisted, I have a witness willing to testify, and I can gather more evidence if you'll support an investigation. Garrett leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. The problem? McKenna, is that Thornton has friends in high places. Politicians, judges, even some federal officials owe him favors. Going after him won't be easy, and it could get dangerous. It's already dangerous. McKenna replied, an innocent woman nearly died because of this conspiracy. How many others have suffered? How much land has been stolen through these false accusations against the Apache? The marshal nodded slowly. You're right. This has gone on long enough. I'll authorize an investigation. And I'll send deputies to Silver Ridge to gather evidence and take statements. But McKenna, you need to understand something. If we do this, we're going to war with some of the most powerful men in the territory. They won't go down without a fight. I understand, McKenna said. Garrett stood and extended his hand. Then let's get to work. I'll need names, dates, every detail you can remember. And we'll need to bring in the Apache woman. Nailin, her testimony will be crucial. McKenna spent the next several hours providing the marshal with everything he knew. Garrett took detailed notes and dispatched telegrams to federal authorities in Washington, requesting support for the investigation by the time they finished. The sun was setting over Tucson. Get some rest tonight. Garrett advised, tomorrow we ride back to Silver Ridge with 6 deputies. We're going to arrest Thornton and search his ranch for evidence, if we find what I think we'll find. This case is going to explode across the territory. McKenna found a room at a modest hotel and tried to sleep. But his mind kept racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. The confrontation with Thornton would be explosive, potentially violent, and he worried about Nailin. Alone at the ranch with only Miguel to protect her. If Thornton discovered what McKenna was doing, he might make a move against her the next morning. McKenna and Marshal Garrett rode out with 6 well-armed deputies. They were a formidable group. And McKenna felt more confident with federal authority backing him. The ride back to Silver Ridge took another 2 days. And as they approached the town, McKenna could sense the tension in the air. News of the marshal's arrival spread quickly. People gathered in the streets, watching nervously as the lawmen rode past. Garrett went directly to Thornton's ranch, a sprawling property with a large house and multiple outbuildings. Thornton emerged as they approached, his face showing surprise and then carefully controlled anger. Marshal Garrett. Thornton said smoothly, "To what do I owe this unexpected visit?" "Richard Thornton, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, arson, and false accusation," Garrett announced. "We also have a warrant to search your property." Thornton's face darkened. On whose authority? "This is outrageous. I'm a respected member of this community." "On federal authority," Garrett said firmly. "Now you can come quietly. Or we can do this the hard way for a moment." McKenna thought Thornton might resist. The rancher's hand moved toward his gun. But he stopped when he saw 6 deputy rifles aimed at him. Slowly, he raised his hands. "You're making a mistake, Marshal," Thornton said coldly. "I have friends who will hear about this." "I'm counting on it," Garrett replied, nodding to his deputies to take Thornton into custody. While some deputies guarded Thornton, others searched his ranch office. Within an hour, they had found what they were looking for: a ledger detailing land acquisitions at suspiciously low prices, correspondence with other ranchers discussing the Apache problem, in terms that made it clear they were planning coordinated actions, and, most damning, contracts with men who had been paid to impersonate Apache raiders and terrorize small landholders. "We've got him," one of the deputies called out. Emerging from the office with an armful of documents, Garrett examined the papers, his expression growing grimmer with each page. "This is worse than I thought. Thornton wasn't just stealing land. He was coordinating with territorial officials to manipulate property laws and squeeze out anyone who wouldn't play along." McKenna felt vindication mixed with anger. Everything Nailin had told him was true. The conspiracy went deeper and wider than he had imagined. What about the others? McKenna asked the other ranchers involved. We'll get them. Garrett promised this evidence implicates at least 7 other men. We'll start making arrests today as they prepared to transport Thornton to Tucson for trial. McKenna felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. They had done it. They had exposed the conspiracy and brought the conspirators to justice. Now Nayland would be exonerated, her name cleared of all charges. But as they rode back toward McKenna's ranch to collect Nayland and bring her to testify before the territorial court, McKenna saw smoke rising in the distance. His heart sank. The smoke was coming from the direction of his property. Ride, he shouted, spurring his horse into a gallop. The group thundered across the desert, covering the distance in record time as they crested the final hill. McKenna's worst fears were realized. His barn was burning, and armed men surrounded the ranch house. He could see Miguel pinned down behind a water trough, returning fire, but he was outnumbered at least 5 to 1. "Federal marshals," Garrett shouted as they charged down the hill. "Drop your weapons, the gunmen," seeing they were now outmatched, began to scatter. Some threw down their weapons and raised their hands. Others tried to flee on horseback. The deputies pursued them while McKenna raced toward the bunkhouse, desperate to find Nayland. The door hung open, bullet holes peppering the wood. Inside, McKenna found signs of a struggle. But no Nayland. His heart pounded with fear. Had they taken her? Was she hurt? McKenna Miguel called weakly from his position behind the trough. McKenna ran to him and saw blood soaking the young man's shirt. They came an hour ago, Thornton's men. They wanted the woman. She fought, tried to escape. They took her toward the hills. "Which way?" McKenna demanded, already mounting his horse. Miguel pointed toward the eastern ridges. "That way, but McKenna, there were too many of them." McKenna didn't wait to hear more. He spurred his horse toward the hills, determined to find Nayland before it was too late. Behind him, he heard Marshal Garrett calling out orders to his deputies, organizing a pursuit, the alliance they had built. The evidence they had gathered, it would all mean nothing if Nayland didn't survive to tell her story. McKenna rode harder, pushing his horse to its limits. Refusing to accept that he might be too late, McKenna pushed his horse hard across the rocky terrain, following the trail left by Thornton's men as they fled toward the eastern hills with Nayland. The tracks were fresh, no more than an hour old, and McKenna knew he was gaining on them behind him. He could hear Marshal Garrett and 3 deputies thundering along in pursuit. But McKenna didn't wait for them. Every second counted. The trail led into a narrow canyon, its walls rising steep and red on either side. McKenna slowed his horse, his instincts warning him of danger. This was perfect ambush country, and Thornton's men would know that as well as he did. He dismounted and continued on foot, leading his horse and keeping close to the canyon wall. A shot rang out, the bullet striking rock inches from McKenna's head. He dove for cover behind a boulder, drawing his revolver as more shots echoed through the canyon. From his position, he could see 3 men positioned on the ridge above. Using the high ground to pin him down, McKenna, a voice called from above. McKenna recognized it as belonging to Jack Reeves, one of Thornton's most trusted ranch hands. "You should have stayed out of this. Now you're going to die out here, and nobody will ever find your body." "It's over, Reeves," McKenna shouted back. "Thornton is under arrest. The marshal has all the evidence." "Killing me won't change that." "Maybe not," Reeves replied, "but it'll make me feel better, and once we're done with you, we'll take care of that Apache woman, make it look like she tried to escape and got herself killed." McKenna felt rage building in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. He needed to think, not react. He studied the terrain around him. Looking for any advantage, the canyon curved ahead, and if he could make it around that bend, he might be able to find a way up to the ridge where the gunmen were positioned. Another volley of shots kept him pinned down. but then McKenna heard something that gave him hope. The sound of more horses approaching from behind. Marshal Garrett and his deputies had caught up. "Federal marshals," Garrett's voice boomed through the canyon. "Throw down your weapons. You're surrounded." The shooting from above stopped abruptly. McKenna could hear urgent whispered conversation from the ridge. Then came the sound of horses moving away quickly, running deeper into the canyon. McKenna emerged from cover as Garrett rode up with his deputies. "They're heading deeper in," McKenna said. "They still have Nayland. Mount up," Garrett ordered his men. "We're not letting them escape." The group pressed forward through the canyon. Moving more cautiously now, but still maintaining speed, the trail wound deeper into the hills. Becoming more rugged and difficult, McKenna knew this country fairly well, and he realized where Thornton's men were headed. There was an old Apache settlement deeper in these hills, abandoned years ago when the army had forced the tribe onto reservations. It would provide good defensive positions and multiple escape routes. As they rounded a sharp turn in the trail, they came upon an unexpected sight. 2 of Thornton's men lay on the ground, their weapons scattered around them. They were alive but unconscious, with wounds that looked like they had been struck from behind. "What happened here?" one of the deputies asked. McKenna examined the scene and saw moccasin prints in the dust. "Apache tracks, fresh ones. They had help," he said, a smile crossing his face. "Apache warriors. Probably from the mountains. They must have heard the shooting and come to investigate." Garrett looked concerned. "That could complicate things. Or it could help us," McKenna said. "If Nayland's people are here, they'll protect her." They continued following the trail, which now showed signs of a running battle. More weapons lay scattered on the ground, and bloodstains marked the rocks. Finally, they emerged into a small valley where the ruins of the old Apache settlement stood. Stone foundations and partial walls were all that remained of what had once been a thriving community. In the center of the ruins, they found Reeves and the remaining 2 gunmen, disarmed and sitting on the ground with their hands bound. Standing guard over them were 4 Apache warriors, armed with rifles and looking fierce and alert. And sitting near them, bruised but alive, was Nayland. "Nayland," McKenna called out, relief flooding through him. She stood and walked toward him, her movements stiff with pain, but her eyes bright with life. "You came," she said simply. "Of course I came," McKenna replied. One of the Apache warriors stepped forward, a tall man with gray streaking his long black hair. He spoke in Apache, and Nayland translated. "This is White Eagle. He is a leader among our people. He says they heard the gunshots and came to help when they saw that white men were chasing one of our own." Marshal Garrett dismounted carefully, his hands visible and away from his weapons. "Tell him we are grateful for his help. Tell him we are federal law officers, and we are here to bring these men to justice for crimes they committed against his people and others." Nayland translated, and White Eagle listened carefully before responding. "He says your people have made many promises before. Promises that were always broken. Why should he trust you now?" Garrett nodded, understanding the skepticism. "Tell him that these men," pointing to the prisoners, "were part of a conspiracy to steal land by blaming Apache people for crimes they did not commit. We have evidence, witnesses, and documents that prove this. The men responsible will face trial and punishment under federal law." Nayland translated, and White Eagle's expression showed interest. He spoke again, and Nayland said, "He wants to know if this means his people will get justice for all the times they were blamed unfairly." "It's a start," Garrett said honestly. "I can't promise to fix everything that's been done wrong, but I can promise that these particular criminals will face justice, and their conspiracy will be exposed. Maybe it will lead to changes, to better treatment of your people." White Eagle considered this for a long moment, then nodded slowly. He gave an order to his warriors, who stepped back from the prisoners. He spoke again to Nayland, who translated. He says he will allow you to take these men. But he wants to know what will happen to our sister. Pointing to herself, will she be safe? Will she be treated fairly? She will be a key witness in the trial, Garrett explained. Her testimony will help convict Thornton and his associates. After the trial, she'll be free to go wherever she chooses. I give my word as a federal officer. White Eagle studied Garrett's face for a long time, then turned to Nayland and spoke in Apache. She nodded, and tears formed in her eyes. When she translated, her voice was thick with emotion. He says, I have been brave, that I have honored our people. He says that if I trust these white men, then he will trust them also. But he warns that if they betray us, his warriors will remember. Fair enough, Garrett said, extending his hand to White Eagle. The Apache leader looked at the offered hand, then grasped it firmly. A gesture of tentative trust between two men from different worlds. As Garrett's deputies took custody of the prisoners, McKenna approached Nayland. Are you hurt? He asked with concern. Bruises only, she replied. They tried to kill me, but I fought. And then White Eagle and his warriors came. They saved my life. They saved more than that, McKenna said. They helped us prove that not all Apache are enemies, that there can be cooperation between our peoples. White Eagle approached them one more time, speaking directly to McKenna in halting English. You, good man, you save our daughter when others want her dead. Apache people remember this. McKenna felt humbled by the warrior's words. I only did what was right. That is more than most do, White Eagle replied. Then he and his warriors melted back into the hills as silently as they had appeared, leaving only their tracks in the dust as evidence they had been there at all. The ride back to Silver Ridge was slow and careful. With the prisoners secured and guarded, Nayland rode beside McKenna, and for the first time since he had saved her from the hanging, she seemed truly at peace. What will you do after the trial? McKenna asked her. I do not know, Nayland admitted. Perhaps I will go to the reservation, try to find my mother and brother. Or perhaps I will return to the mountains with White Eagle's people. I must think about it. You'll always have a place on my ranch if you want it, McKenna offered, as a guest, a friend. Whatever you choose, Nayland smiled at him. A genuine smile that transformed her face. You are a strange white man. Thomas McKenna, but a good one. I will remember your offer. As they approached Silver Ridge with their prisoners and their story of justice finally being served, McKenna felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, things could change for the better in this harsh and beautiful territory. The territorial courthouse in Tucson was packed beyond capacity on the morning of September 15, 1883, when the trial of Richard Thornton and his co-conspirators began. People had traveled from across Arizona territory to witness what was already being called the trial of the decade. The case had attracted attention from newspapers as far away as San Francisco and Denver, all eager to report on the conspiracy that had rocked the frontier. McKenna sat in the front row of the gallery, with Nayland beside him. She wore a simple dress that some sympathetic women in Tucson had provided, and though she still bore fading bruises from her ordeal, she held her head high with quiet dignity. Miguel Cortez sat on her other side, his shoulder bandaged from the gunshot wound he had received defending the ranch. The territorial judge, a stern man named Harrison Wells, entered the courtroom and took his seat behind the bench. He had a reputation for fairness and an intolerance for corruption, which was why the federal government had specifically requested he preside over this case. This court is now in session, Judge Wells announced, his voice carrying through the packed room. We are here to hear evidence in the case of the United States versus Richard Thornton and 7 co-defendants, charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, arson, attempted murder, and violation of federal treaty rights. Thornton sat at the defense table with his expensive lawyers. looking confident despite the evidence against him. The other defendants, including Reeves and several prominent ranchers, sat nearby, all dressed in their finest clothes. Trying to project an image of respectability, the prosecutor, a federal attorney named Samuel Harrison, who had been sent from Washington specifically for this case, stood and began his opening statement. "Your Honor, members of the jury, what we will prove in this courtroom over the coming days is nothing less than a systematic campaign of terror and theft. These men, pointing to the defendants, used fear and prejudice to steal land from honest settlers and to violate the rights of Apache people who were already suffering under unjust policies." Harrison laid out the case methodically, explaining how Thornton and his associates had identified valuable properties owned by small ranchers and farmers. They would then stage false raids, making it appear that Apache warriors had attacked these properties. The frightened owners would flee, and the conspirators would purchase the abandoned land for a fraction of its value. "We will show you documents in the defendant's own handwriting," Harrison continued. "We will present witnesses who participated in these crimes and have now come forward to tell the truth. And we will show you how an innocent Apache woman nearly died because she had the misfortune of being in the wrong place, when these men needed a scapegoat for their crimes." Over the next 3 days, Harrison presented a devastating case. Miguel took the stand and testified about witnessing Thornton's men burn the Henderson Ranch. His voice shook with emotion as he described how they had laughed about blaming the Apache. "I was afraid to speak before," Miguel said, "but I could not let an innocent woman hang for crimes she did not commit. My conscience would not allow it." Other witnesses came forward, men who had worked for Thornton and the other conspirators. Some had been paid to dress as Apache warriors and terrorize settlers. Others had helped forge documents and bribe local officials. Each testimony added another layer to the conspiracy, revealing its scope and cruelty. When the prosecution presented Thornton's ledger and correspondence as evidence, a gasp went through the courtroom. The documents showed not only the land scheme, but also payments to corrupt territorial officials who had looked the other way or actively assisted in the fraud. On the 4th day, it was Nellen's turn to testify. She walked to the witness stand with her head held high, and McKenna felt his heart swell with pride at her courage. The courtroom fell silent as she was sworn in. "Please state your name for the record," Harrison said gently. "I am called Nalen," she said clearly. "I am Apache of the Chiricahua people." Harrison led her through her testimony, and Nalen described her life before she was captured. How she had been surviving alone in the desert after her family was torn apart by forced relocation. She explained that she was a healer gathering medicinal plants, and had been nowhere near any of the ranches that were attacked. "On the day you were captured," Harrison asked, "where were you?" "I was in the desert." "Many miles from any settlement," Nalen replied. "I was gathering sage and other healing plants. I saw no one, spoke to no one. I was alone." "And yet you were accused of being present at the Henderson Ranch fire," Harrison said. "Yes," Nalen said. "A man I had never seen before said he saw me there. But he lied. Someone paid him to lie so they could have a reason to hang me." Thornton's defense attorney, a sharp-faced man named Edwards, tried to discredit Nalen during cross-examination. "How do we know you're telling the truth?" he demanded. "You're Apache. Your people have been at war with settlers for years. Why should this jury believe anything you say?" Nalen looked at him calmly. "My people have been defending their homes and families," she said. "We did not start this war. It was brought to us, but I am not a warrior. I am a healer. I do not lie. My word is sacred to me." Judge Wells intervened. "Counselor, the witness's ethnicity is not on trial here. Stick to questions relevant to the charges." Edwards tried another approach, suggesting that Nalen might have been acting as a scout for war parties, but she calmly refuted each accusation. explaining her movements and activities with such specific detail that it became clear she was telling the truth. When McKenna took the stand, he testified about finding the belt buckle at the Henderson Ranch and the survey stakes that indicated someone had been planning to claim the property. He described Thornton's threats and the systematic campaign to isolate him from the community. "Why did you take such risks to help Nayland?" the prosecutor asked. McKenna thought for a moment before answering. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said simply. "Because I've seen too much injustice in my life to stand by and let another innocent person suffer. And because if we don't have laws that apply equally to everyone, regardless of their race or background, then we have nothing worth defending." His words hung in the air, and McKenna saw several jury members nodding thoughtfully. The defense tried to paint McKenna as an Apache sympathizer with questionable motives, but their attacks fell flat. Marshall Garrett testified to McKenna's character and the thoroughness of the investigation. And even Sheriff Patterson, clearly uncomfortable, admitted under oath that he had been pressured by Thornton to look the other way. On the 8th day of the trial, both sides presented their closing arguments. Thornton's lawyers argued that their clients were victims of circumstance, that any irregularities in land transactions were honest mistakes, and that the testimony against them came from disgruntled former employees and unreliable witnesses. But Harrison's closing argument was powerful and damning. "Gentlemen of the jury," he said, "you have seen the evidence. You have heard the witnesses. You know in your hearts what happened here. These men," pointing to the defendants, "used fear and hatred to enrich themselves. They destroyed families, stole land, and nearly murdered an innocent woman to cover their crimes. They betrayed everything that law and justice are supposed to represent." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Now it is up to you to decide. Will you let these crimes go unpunished, or will you send a message that in this territory, no one is above the law, no matter how wealthy or powerful they might be? The choice is yours." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. As the sun began to set, they returned to the courtroom. The foreman, a weathered rancher from outside Tucson, stood and faced the judge. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Wells asked. "We have, Your Honor," the foreman replied. "On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, how do you find the defendants?" "Guilty on all counts," the foreman said. A roar went up in the courtroom, some cheering, others protesting. Judge Wells banged his gavel repeatedly until order was restored. The jury found the defendants guilty on all charges. Thornton's face went pale, his confident demeanor finally cracking. The other defendants showed various reactions, some crying, others angry, all defeated. Judge Wells announced that sentencing would take place the following morning. That night, Tucson celebrated. The news spread through the territory like wildfire. A powerful conspiracy had been broken. Justice had been served, and an innocent woman had been vindicated. In their hotel room, Nayland sat by the window, looking out at the celebrating crowds. McKenna sat nearby, exhausted but satisfied. "It is over," Nayland said softly. "It's over," McKenna confirmed. "You're free, Nayland, truly free." She turned to look at him, tears glistening in her eyes. "Thank you," she said, "for everything you gave me back my life." "You fought for it yourself," McKenna replied. "I just helped where I could, outside." The sounds of celebration continued late into the night, marking not just a legal victory, but perhaps the beginning of a new era in Arizona territory. One where justice might finally be blind to the color of a person's skin. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as Judge Wells prepared to deliver the sentences. The courtroom was once again packed, with people standing in the aisles and spilling out into the hallway. McKenna and Nayland sat in their usual places, flanked by Miguel and Marshall Garrett. Judge Wells looked down at the defendants, his expression stern. "Richard Thornton, You and your co-conspirators have been found guilty of crimes that strike at the very foundation of law and justice in this territory. He began, his voice carrying through the silent courtroom. You used fear and prejudice as weapons to enrich yourselves. You destroyed families, stole land through fraud, and attempted to murder an innocent woman to cover your crimes. Thornton stood, his face pale but still defiant, trying to maintain some shred of dignity in his final moments as a free man. I hereby sentence you to 20 years in the territorial prison. Judge Wells announced. Additionally, all lands and assets acquired through your fraudulent schemes are to be seized and returned to their rightful owners or sold at public auction, with proceeds going to compensate your victims. The other defendants received sentences ranging from 10 to 15 years. Reeves, who had attempted to murder McKenna and Nayland, received an additional 5 years for those crimes as the sentences were read. Some of the defendants broke down in tears, while others maintained stony silence. When the sentencing concluded, Judge Wells turned his attention to Nayland. Miss Nayland, please approach the bench. Nayland stood and walked forward, her movements graceful despite the tension in the room. You were wrongfully accused and nearly executed for crimes you did not commit, Judge Wells said, his voice softening, on behalf of this court and the territory of Arizona. I offer you our deepest apologies. All charges against you are hereby dismissed with prejudice. You are free to go wherever you wish, with the court's assurance that you will not be harassed or persecuted. The courtroom erupted in applause, and Nayland bowed her head respectfully to the judge before returning to her seat beside McKenna. Judge Wells wasn't finished. Furthermore, he continued, raising his voice to quiet the crowd, I am ordering a full investigation into all land transactions in this territory over the past 5 years. Any property seized through similar fraudulent means will be returned to its rightful owners. This court will not tolerate corruption or the exploitation of racial prejudice for personal gain. The judge's final words sent ripples through the territory that would be felt for years to come. His ruling opened the door for dozens of families who had lost their land to reclaim it. And it sent a clear message that the days of unchecked land fraud were over. In the weeks following the trial, McKenna's life began to change in unexpected ways. The townspeople of Silver Ridge, many of whom had shunned him during the ordeal, began returning to his side. Some came to apologize, admitting they had been wrong to doubt him. Others came simply to shake his hand and thank him for having the courage to stand up for what was right. Miguel recovered from his wounds and was offered a job as a deputy marshal by Garrett. He accepted, becoming one of the first Mexican-Americans to serve in that capacity in the territory. His testimony had made him a hero to many, and his courage had opened doors that had previously been closed. McKenna's ranch, which had been damaged during the attack by Thornton's men, was rebuilt with help from neighbors who wanted to make amends for their earlier treatment of him. The barn rose again, stronger than before, and McKenna found himself with more friends than he had ever had in his years on the frontier. But the biggest change came with Nayland's decision about her future. One evening, as they sat on the porch of McKenna's ranch watching the sun set over the desert, Nayland spoke. I have been thinking about what to do next, she said, and McKenna asked. Though he had been afraid to press her on the subject, I went to the reservation to look for my mother and brother. Nayland said, her voice thick with emotion. I found them. They are alive. Struggling, but alive. My mother cried when she saw me. She thought I was dead. That's wonderful, McKenna said, genuinely happy for her. It is, Nayland agreed. But I also saw how they suffer there. The land is poor. The government supplies are inadequate. People are sick and hungry. I told them about you, about what happened. And my mother said something that made me think. What did she say? McKenna asked. She said that maybe I survived for a reason. Maybe I was meant to be a bridge between our peoples to help others understand that Apache people are not the enemy. That we want the same things all people want: safety, food, a place to call home. Dignity. Nayland paused, looking out at the horizon. I want to use my story to help my people, to speak for those who cannot speak for themselves. McKenna felt his heart swell with admiration. That's a noble goal, he said. But it won't be easy. There's still a lot of hatred and prejudice out there. I know, Nayland said, but after everything that happened, after seeing justice prevail against such powerful men, I have hope. If one white rancher can stand up for what is right, maybe others will too. In the months that followed, Nayland became an advocate for Apache rights, working with Marshal Garrett and federal officials to improve conditions on the reservations and to investigate other cases of fraud and abuse. Her testimony at the trial had made her a known figure, and newspapers began publishing her accounts of life on the reservations and the injustices her people faced. McKenna supported her work, providing his ranch as a base of operations and using his own growing influence to open doors for her. Their friendship deepened into something more, a mutual respect and affection that transcended the boundaries of race and culture that had divided their peoples for so long. 2 years after the trial, significant changes had come to the territory. New laws were passed protecting the rights of Native peoples. Several corrupt officials were removed from office, and a spirit of reform began to spread through the region. It wasn't perfect. Prejudice and injustice still existed, but there was progress, real and measurable. White Eagle and his band of Apache warriors who had helped rescue Nayland negotiated a treaty that allowed them to remain in their traditional mountain territories rather than being forced onto the reservation. The treaty was one of the first in the territory that actually honored the rights and wishes of the Apache people, and it set a precedent for future negotiations. On a spring day in 1885, McKenna stood on his porch looking out at the land he had fought so hard to protect. Nayland came to stand beside him, and he took her hand. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. All the trouble, the danger, the loss. McKenna thought about the question. About the months when he had been isolated and threatened, when his life had hung in the balance. Then he thought about Nayland, alive and strong beside him, about Miguel serving as a respected lawman, about the families who had reclaimed their stolen land, about the small but significant changes that were making the territory a more just place. "No," he said firmly, "I don't regret any of it. We did something important. We proved that justice can prevail over power, that one person standing up can make a difference that's worth any price." Nayland smiled and squeezed his hand. "My people have a saying," she said, "the coyote may be clever, but the eagle sees farther. You saw what others did not. You saw me as a person, not as an enemy. That vision changed everything." As the sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red, McKenna and Nayland stood together, two people from different worlds who had found common ground in the pursuit of justice. Their story became legend in the territory, passed down through generations as a reminder that courage, integrity, and compassion can overcome even the deepest divisions. The conspiracy that had threatened to destroy so many lives was broken. The men who had used fear and prejudice as weapons were behind bars, and an Apache woman who had come within moments of an unjust death now stood as a symbol of hope and reconciliation, proving that in the end, truth and justice can prevail, even on the harsh frontier of the American West years later. When people would ask McKenna what made him risk everything to save Nayland, he would smile and give the same answer he had given in court: because it was the right thing to do. And in those simple words lay a truth that would echo through the generations, a reminder that sometimes doing the right thing is reason enough, no matter the cost.